Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second day of our event. So, we are currently at the International Conference in Effect Do We Elect? This morning's panel is a warming up panel for today's hard work. Ahead of us are one more panel and multiple working groups. I know that all of you have the agendas, but just to name some of working groups, we are going today to talk about the trust, building the trust, efficient administration, and safeguarding against manipulation. We are going to talk about how to strengthen democracy by guarding the vote. We are going to talk about how to ensure media pluralism and to talk, for example, about the role of regulators. So, as I said, the first session of the day will serve as our warm up. And I think that we are very grateful for having three great panelists with me here and for being ready to, I would say, be a part of the conversation about issues that are not just light ones. Yesterday, we had, I would say, really great conversation. And we had a lot of food for thought, and I hope that we will continue in this direction. Serving in different countries, diplomats learn about many specific attributes of electoral processes around the world. Not all elections are exciting in the same way, as we heard yesterday. But the question we often ask is whether the same criteria can be applied to assessing the quality of elections elsewhere. So, I also, before introduce our panelists today, I want also to thank the teams of three embassies, but also additional embassies that serve as DiploWatch teams. So just for those who are coming from abroad, here in Serbia we have some tradition that when elections approach, a team of embassies join into DiploWatch team, and they are really, like helpful in observing the elections, talking about the elections, and putting elections as a like a high thing on the agenda. So today with us, I have His Excellency's Ambassador Emmanuel Joffre. Welcome. I also have Her Excellency Ambassador Kristin Melson from Norway. Hello. And His Excellency Ambassador Edward Ferguson, British Embassy in Serbia. Welcome and thank you for joining me today. So I'm sure that all of you brings unique experience to our conversation today. And I'm really, I think, as a lot of guests look forward to hearing your insights on those, how, how you can compare your experience with the elections dynamics here in Serbia. So let me begin by asking Mr. Joffre about, and I mean, that will be the question for all of you. It's about ambassadorial role itself. So we often hear that nature of an ambassador's job can vary significantly depending on the host country. In some countries, ambassadors are much more publicly visible and engaged than they, let's say, typically would be elsewhere. So is Serbia one of those countries where an ambassador is expected to play a more active and visible role? And do you sometimes feel that expectations placed upon ambassadors here might be too high?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for the invitation and thanking CERTA for organizing the conference. We've been following CERTA for many years, and we really appreciate the important work you do for strengthening democracy in Serbia. So I want to congratulate you and your team for everything you've done since I'm here. I've seen great work coming from you, and I encourage certainly to continue that. When it comes to your question, I have to say that I'm a little bit in a specific position because the nature of my work is a bit atypical in the sense that as the EU ambassador to Serbia, the main purpose of my functions is to get my function to disappear. So that should not be no longer a EU ambassador to Serbia, but a representation of the Commission in Serbia. This is really a very specific situation, I have to say. I work for the Serbian citizens to become EU citizens, etc. So this is about the special relationship that exists between the EU and a candidate country that certainly make a big difference compared to any other countries in the world where we would serve as a EU ambassador, and of course makes the nature of the work very specific. And the reason why we're here is to make sure that Serbia align its legislation, policy, and standards to the European Union as quickly as possible. And this is the very nature of enlargement policy. This is the very nature of the negotiations. It's not about negotiating which standards to apply, but how quickly to apply the standards. And of course, this gives us a insight, a role, a functions which is very specific and very atypical. It's not about interfering in domestic affairs. It's not about dictating the way things should be done, but work with a very broad spectrum of society, which is certainly the government and the executive, but also civil society, the political parties that are in Serbia, very intensively, because we have a work to do together. The functioning of democratic institutions specifically is one of the criteria that we are looking at, and which will be featuring, has been featuring prominently in the country report, and will continue to feature prominently in the country report, because of course, in order to become a member state, you need also to have functioning democratic institutions. So in that respect, yes, I think that we are much more visible, we are probably much more engaged, but it's an engagement in the spirit of reaching an objective that Serbia itself has set for itself. It's a very clear decision that Serbia has made, want to become a member of the European Union. It's a good decision. And certainly this requires a number of steps, and part of the work we've been doing also related to the elections is part and parcel of this objective.
Thank you. Ambassador Ferguson, I mean, like, we see you very often on different events. Is it, expectations from you to be present, like, so much?
I mean, I think every country is different, and I think one of the challenges as an ambassador is trying to understand the environment that you're in when you arrive. I mean, I was also ambassador in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is a quite specific context. One of my roles was to sit on the steering board of the Peace Implementation Council, which is charged with overseeing the implementation of the peace agreement. And that required quite a hands-on role at times to, in some ways, get more involved in domestic politics than I think is, usual for ambassadors. And I think it's a very different context here in Serbia, whereas Ambassador Giuffre was saying, Serbia is a fully sovereign state that will make its own decisions, but it has made certain decisions that bring it into the international sphere. That strategic ambition to join the European Union entails aligning with a set of values and a set of standards. The invitation to ODIHR to come and oversee and monitor elections also comes out with a set of recommendations. In Britain, we talk about the role of our monarch, our king or queen, as being to advise, to encourage, and to warn the government. So it's not an interfering role, but it's an advisory role. And I think really the role of an ambassador is often very similar to that. And I think that's what we try to do. But I think I would add, we also try to help where we can. And we do have, these countries to my right have more money than I do, but we have resources available that we try and use constructively and productively to support those strategic goals, to strengthen the democratic institutions, to enhance the efficiency of the rule of law, to strengthen the independence and and improve the quality of the media environment, and so on. All with that aim of trying to help Serbia to achieve that ambition to join the EU. So, as I say, it is not an interventionist role; it is an advisory and encouraging, at times a warning role. But we absolutely are, willing to work with anyone who wants good things and who wants to achieve that progress, whether that's in government, whether it's in parliament, whether it's in civil society. And just to echo, the words before, I think the role that CERTA has been doing has been really important, and we've been really, privileged to work with you. So look forward to continuing to do so.
Thank you. Ambassador Melsom, Norway is also a great friend of Serbia. Are there some special expectations from you in Serbia, or how do you feel about it?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. And I've been here a little more than a year now, and I will also acknowledge the great work that Sarta is doing and what I have learned during this first year and these kind of two elections in this first year. And I understood that you had a really good discussion yesterday. I'm really sad now that I didn't join it. And I heard that I'm looking forward also to what that will comes out of your workshops. Well, yes, in a way, there are expectations because our relations with Serbia is very good and it's very easy to be Norwegian in Serbia. And then, of course, then I have to think about, what that does mean. How should I act in this kind of atmosphere? And I think that we have very different roles, but we also have to think about, what is actually our aim here. I'm here to represent Norway. I very different from Ambassador Geoffrey, who actually represents 27 countries in a way, but also have a very different role and a different disability as well. I should also advocate, Norwegian views and politics, our international policy, but at the same time, I shall also maintaining and strengthening our bilateral relation. So I have to strike a balance here. And I think sometimes visibility it's linked to many kind of aspects. It's what you who you are, but it's also what country you represent. This is a small country far up in the north. Ambassador Ferguson represents a much kind of bigger country with more power, maybe. But it's also about what you want to get out of it, and we want to help also. As I agree with Ambassador Ferguson, I am not. I don't like what I would call a megaphone diplomacy. To be very criticizing up in public. I prefer more to do the diplomatic way, to talk in, not private, but to have good conversations where we can come up with our views, but also suggestions. And how we can help. And we also assist Serbia, and in particular on their EU path. You might think that we are two non-EU countries now, but both of us wish that Serbia would be part of the European Union and take part of all the values. And at the same, I also think that it's important for us to follow up on the other recommendations, to keep it on the agenda, the importance of there I very much also appreciated to be invited to the parliament in the discussions with the speaker, where also Sarta is represented, to how to follow up the recommendations from the ODIHR, and actually that we can see the implementations coming, because this is one issue here. There are so many recommendations that need to be followed up, and now the time is now. So all in all, of course, we like to showcase when we do something positive, but that also can benefit. For instance, how we were very early in assisting after the very tragic school shooting. We got experts from Norway coming here to assist. It's not for our publicity, but it's actually to help, since we also had some very traumatic experiences. So sharing good practices, I think, is a way also that an ambassador would like to kind of emphasize.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. As I said at the very beginning, I mean, your continuous engagement has been very valuable to us in observing elections and understanding democratic processes. And I would again like to underline how important it is that especially three of you put the elections very high on your agenda. So there is a question, all of you observed the elections in Serbia. So, from your experience, how do Serbian elections compare to those in your own countries? And what stood out to you as the most maybe notable differences? I mean, like, I think your elections were the most recent.
Yeah. Yes, we had our election, general election on the 4th of July this year. And, interestingly, have just had a change of government after 14 years of Conservative government. We've just had, I think, a very efficient change of government to the Labour government. Within a few weeks, we were able to host most of the leaders of Europe in London with our new Prime Minister chairing, which I think is testament to how both our democratic institutions are functioning as they should, but also some of the values of our civil service and others that we can switch focus and to the new government of the day, overnight. So I think that's a positive. Yeah, I mean, I observed both the elections in the last 12 months here in Serbia, and it's a really fascinating thing to do, and you learn a lot, I think, from doing so. What are the sort of similarities and differences? I think on the day, I think my impression and the impression of my teams that we had right around the country was that the elections were generally pretty well administered, and I think that tallies with the findings of the ODIHR report. But I think the sort of before and after, there are some issues that are a bit different. I think within in the before stage, if you like, I think the media is one obvious area. In the UK, not just in election cycles, but throughout the year. If we're talking politics, you will almost always have representatives of, both government and opposition on the media being able to offer different perspectives. It's much more tightly regulated during the election period, where not just on the public broadcaster BBC, but all the TV channels have to follow certain rules, which are very strictly policed by Ofcom, our media regulator. And if there are signs of bias or inaccuracy, those are very quickly jumped on. And I think that's something that Serbia could perhaps look at and learn from. I think in the post-election period as well, I talked about just the speed of the way that our institutions function. We had a new cabinet up and running a day after the election. We have a different political system, so I think but the way that our rule of law system, for example, our justice system deals with complaints about any improprieties on a really accelerated time frame with pretty clear communications about what's going on. Again, that feels like something that Serbia could learn from. And then I guess also on the sort of overarching, I mean, you just mentioned, Kristen, that Serbia has a lot of recommendations in ODIHR. I think in the December report there were 25 recommendations. Our last ODIHR report, we had 5 recommendations to work on. So it's not a numbers game, right? I mean, the key point is, are the key recommendations being dealt with, and are they being dealt with efficiently? And I think it's really good that there is a working group in place now with government, with opposition parties, with civil society, including CERTA and Transparency Serbia and CERTID working together. We're very supportive of that process. We really think it's important to see those key recommendations being dealt with as efficiently as possible.
I mean, thank you for bringing up this post-election period. I mean, this conference as well served for this dialogue, not waiting, as we yesterday were discussing, 2 months before the elections to address some of the things. I mean, yesterday we talked also about the institutions, and just to remind us that in last 10 years, we actually lost 2.5 years waiting actually for institutions after the elections to be established. And this is one of the, I would say, main challenges for Serbia. Ambassador Giuffre, I know European elections are a little bit different. I mean, we can't say, but please, I mean, the experience is for sure different because so many countries, but what would you bring as
I learned on elections that one important issue is to avoid comparing elections with each other between countries and within the same country. An election should be compared to international standards. Otherwise, we lose a little bit our way. within the European Union, we have this policy of relying very much on ODIHR assessment of an election process, because an election process is a very complex event. It's not only election day. What you see on election day as an individual might be even misleading compared to the overall process. It does require knowledge throughout the campaign, skills, capacity, and resources. We always refer to the ODIHR assessment on elections, as we did, for example, for the December elections here. And the EU concluded that the process required tangible improvement and further reforms. So we set up a bit of a goal, which is very much, as the British ambassador indicated, based on the recommendation that ODIHR has issued after the recent election, but also longer in the past. But we also call for methods how to improve this, how to implement this reform, which is a cross-party dialogue, an inclusive dialogue involving also civil society. Because if you want a result which is resilient and convincing, you need also a consensus around this result. And we have also tools. So we have a project, a regional project to fund ODIHR to work on the implementation of the recommendations. And we worked here in the context of the enlargement process with the government, and particularly with the reform agenda for the growth plan, to see how these specific issues related to this tangible improvement and further reforms could be articulated in practice. And I think we should be quite happy with the result, because now we have in the reform agenda a commitment from the government. The reform agenda was adopted by the government in Serbia and has been approved by the Commission just yesterday, where he says we need to do a number of things that I think matches exactly the main concerns expressed during the recent election. So, and we have now a clear path forwards. We certainly need to continue the work. And the fact that there is a working group now in the Skupština that is looking at this issue. We have a time frame that is linked to the reform agenda. This is encouraging. I think it's really something that we have to highlight. And in that respect, I also want to recognize the role of civil society here at CERTA and other organizations like Transparency Serbia and CESI that have been working very hard. Obviously, the proof of elections is in the voting, or the proof of elections is in the election process. So, and in the reform, so we still have to implement to reach that stage. But certainly, this is, I think, the way forward. And looking at other elections is perhaps misleading. I think we need to focus on the standards, on what has been committed, on the reports of ODIHR and the expertise of domestic NGOs, and certainly we need political parties to negotiate, discuss, and come to some solutions.
Thank you. It's important. And I think I can, like on behalf of CERTA, promise that we are going to give you, but also our government and opposition, hard time in reaching those standards. We expect from ODIHR to be, next to us, and that, I know we are very often impatient, but we want more. I mean, we want those standards. We hope and expect that Serbia, can reach those standards. So, it's also up to us to put the pressure on those who needs to deliver this. I mean, Norway is considered one of the most democratic and transparent countries in the world, with a strong emphasis on equality and civic participation. And elections here and in Norway, I mean, Norway is expecting to have elections next year. Am I right? Yes. So
we are expected parliamentary elections next year, and even if Ambassador Geoffrey said you should not compare at all, at least I can just tell a little how different we are, because we have fixed elections. So actually by law, we cannot have snap elections. So every 4 years we have parliamentary elections. It's the second Monday in September, so we all know when. And every 4th year we have municipality elections. So it's exactly the same kind of procedure. And so every second year we have an election, either parliament or municipality. So very different from here. And even my colleagues at the embassy, the local staff, like, what? No, it can't be true. Yes, it is true. Yeah, but what if the government, if they have to resign? Well, then the opposition is asked to form a government. So no elections. So, that is one part. But what struck me here is, of course, that you have had a lot of elections and then losing a lot of time because you haven't started to look at all the recommendations that come from ODIHR from one election to another. But I have to admit, because I decided I will also look at our recommendations from ODIHR, and there I noticed, so even if the report is very short, very brief, I noticed that there were recommendations from the previous elections that were still not implemented. So we also have some work to do. So it's always good to also go back and look at yourself and not only raise the finger here, even if I also think that we have to look into the contents of what kind of recommendations that are most important, because there are a lot of recommendations that maybe are much smaller and can be dealt with very easily, but then you have some kind of very substantial and important ones. But then it is about the election campaign. And I want to just talk a little about the role of media, because that is where maybe what struck me most here was the media coverage and how one party had got a lot of coverage compared to others. And there we have much more strict rules. Of course, when you come up to the election, then there is about time for each party. We have debates where all party leaders are present, and even the time each one is talking, it is quite strict. But also during the years, pluralistic, critical media that maybe I will not say always, because but more maybe that the discussion is about the topics and about political issues more than actually the person itself, so the politician itself, even if that also can happen. But they see this is one aspect that maybe struck me here, very person focused side, and then of course also a very kind of the media coverage were very well. One party got much more coverage than all the others. And I think also the political debate, to have a respectful debate. And one thing that I also have never experienced was is like boycotting an election, which I also think is for a democratic country, this is really sad when political parties decide to boycott.
I mean, like, it's a political decision, and we can, of course, discuss about those decisions. But may I continue? Just because yesterday, and we are all the time talking actually about this year as a super election year. I mean, like a lot of countries, a lot of people are going to vote. So I mean, like yesterday we were talking about whether there is a hope in those elections. Is democracy winning or losing this super election year? What do you think? How his impression coming from the Norway? I mean, I understand and I agree. Don't compare, but let's dream about some standard. So
Well,
how do you see it?
Well, one thing is the election in itself, but then it is the result of the elections and what comes after the elections. Because we can say that for the democracy, we need a democrat, we need elections. How democratic they are, that might sometimes be a question. But the question, well, sometimes we don't like the result of the election, but that's also democracy. So we can suddenly find ourselves in a kind of awkward position because we are afraid for what will come after the election. And what maybe worries me most is actually the interference from what we call unknown actors that have we hear that will have an impact on the election results, and we don't know who they are, but we hear that this is happening. That is, I think, a huge challenge for our democratic elections. How to deal with this, how to fight against it. And then, of course, another thing is participation. We notice in some countries that voters' participation is quite low. So the result is based on those who vote, but we have a huge group of people that do not see the point of voting, or that the process of registering and actually be able to vote is so complicated that people do not, even do not bother because it is too complicated, or are not allowed to vote because they are in the wrong place. I want to give one example from Norway there. And that is about voting, because we can vote very early. So kind of pre-voting during whole summer. So for instance, for me, I can go back to Oslo in summertime and I vote for the parliamentary election in September. So very different, but
yeah.
but we are like 6 million now, and Serbia is 7, 8. So
7, 8, yeah.
And we are much kind of longer country, and you are much more kind of compact. So things are possible, but to allow people to vote and make it easy for people to vote, I think also is an important part of that.
Right. Ambassador Ferguson, how does it look to you so far? Super election year.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge year for elections, hasn't it? I think half the world's population has voted or will vote this year. So it's pretty, I think as I'm as strategists, I think we look at the world and we think, well, there's a lot of risk of change and turbulence, which is opportunity and challenge. I have to say, our election left me feeling pretty hopeful. I mean, the one we've just been through in Britain, I don't think there's any question that we had a result that reflected the collective will of the people within the context of our electoral system. We had a very, as I say, a smooth and efficient change of government, and I think we've seen stability throughout, and I think that's encouraging. But I do think there are some real challenges. I think some of them we mentioned there. I think I would particularly mention, just the mass of information that people are, swamped with in their lives these days, particularly through social media, and very often the mass of misinformation or disinformation, deliberate misinformation. And I think it's increasingly challenging for people to work out what is true and what is not true. And I think, my reflection on that is just how important it makes the role of public broadcasters as a source of fact-based, objective, reliable information that citizens can count on in order to make informed choices about which sort of government they want to have. And so I think that really focusing on the public broadcaster, is it fulfilling its mission? What needs to change to allow it to provide that essential public service in a context where otherwise we risk leaving our citizens adrift without an anchor in a world of swirling information, I think is absolutely critical.
Ambassador Geoffrey, does it like democracy winning or losing in this Super Bowl year?
Well, first of all, the year is not over yet. We still have a couple of elections.
Very important. Yesterday we talked about it.
I would say that I think we came to the conclusion and awareness that democracy is continuously tested. And this is not something that we should take for granted. When I used to work for DEAR, which was last century, we didn't observe elections in what we can call Western Europe. We observe elections in the Western Balkans, in the Eastern European country, in the former communist country. And now ODIHR observe elections in all its member states, participating states. This is because we realize that it's not an acquis that we have once reached democracy. We are good. I think we are realized the hard way that democracy is every day has to be defended and made resilient. And of course, for us, these elections this year in the 27 member states, one of the largest democratic exercise across the globe. Member states remain responsible for organizing the election. They choose the election system. They conduct the process. We don't even vote on the same day. We have 3 or 4 days under which we vote. But there was an effort to look at certain aspects at the pan-EU level, and particularly the media, not only the traditional media, but also the new media, the online media, because there is a clear sense of vulnerability in that respect. The Commissioner for Values and Transparency, Jourova, the Vice President of the Commission, she did a tour in half of the member states before the election to try to mobilize member states in order to look into the possibility of disruptions of the elections, attack to the integrity of the process, particularly through online media. She looked at foreign interference, disinformation, the use of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and new technologies. And we have produced a working document out of this process that give a positive result. So in that sense, we've been winning, because the document says, I'm read, based on current available information, no major information interference operation capable of disrupting the election were recorded. So we managed to control as far as we understand, but there were attempts to disrupt, attempts to create, to diminish trust in the process. And by diminishing trust in the process, you also undermine the credibility of the process itself and hence the credibility of the final result. This is actually happening. It's happening in our society. It's happening across the globe. And certainly we need to be alert. The European Union has a number of tools that we've mobilized in the pre-election phase before the European election to try to counter this wave of disinformation, information manipulation, and use of new technologies. And the results, as I said, it seems to be a positive result. Also, we've recorded this year for the European election the highest turnout since 2004. Is not a very, very high turnout, but it's more than 50%. And again, it's the highest. We've seen turnout increasing in European elections. So this is another win, because turnout participation is also an indications of how much people trust the process and whether their votes is making an impact, so which is very much the subject of your discussion during this conference.
Like disinformation, and thank you. I will just link one question to this, because I mean, like, I have some other or higher expectations from, like, Serbia is a candidate for joining the EU, like, and on our elections, do you expect, like, that EU integration is more present as a topic, like on the, pre-campaigning campaign? Because what you are saying, I mean, like, there's a lot of issues that we could discuss, and somehow I think we don't as a society. How do you see it? Like, do you miss EU integration when you watch, like, our elections and the campaign?
Well, certainly, this is not so much about the integrity of the process. It's about which sort of topic people and political parties would bring up during the campaign. I personally believe that the European integration is a strategic goal of Serbia. It is a process that is changing Serbia for the better. That has to change Serbia for the better, bringing higher standards to the citizens in every possible area, to increase prosperity and also to bring more security. So it's a huge decision that Serbia has made in joining the European Union. It does imply hard work, and certainly my appeal when I meet anyone that want to listen to me from the political side, the business side, the civil society side, is this is an issue that needs to be discussed with the citizen. It needs to be explained. It needs to be brought to the attention of people, and people can make a decision. So I certainly would be delighted to see more debate on the European integrations during elections in any candidate country, including Serbia.
Thank you. I mean, like, both of you said that you are there also to help Serbia in, like, in this integration process. About, like, what about your expectations? Do you see, like, the EU integration process is enough present, especially in this pre-election campaign period? maybe even after? How do you see that?
Well, maybe not that present. If we are as Ambassador Geoffrey said, it is a strategic goal and it is a kind of agreement among the parties about where the path is. So we haven't seen any party that are kind of diverted or away from that path. But then it is everything that actually uh, gets into this package. There you have a lot of topics that should be debated more. Maybe for the visibility of EU and what everything EU does, you could have had more visibility and talk more about actually what does it mean to become an EU member. Well, I will not talk about our debate back. Well, there are no debates in my country. It is a kind of like political suicide if you start to mention it. But and I see some other colleagues laughing as well. But everything, what does it mean for Serbia to become an EU member, and what does Serbia need to do to become an EU member? Maybe should be more visible. Because it becomes very abstract for people. People will care about their daily life, about more kind of needed in both when it comes to very basic needs, but also more kind of broader. And foreign policy, of course, not on the top agenda in an election, but a lot of what they now start to implement, or when it comes to their membership process, is very important for the population and should be more visible.
Your experience about debating EU,
Yeah, well, I'm gonna steer clear of value judgment, given as the country that chose to leave the European Union. But I think it is obviously I think it is a fundamentally strategic decision of Serbia that it seeks to join the European Union, and therefore I think it is really important that it is a key discussion topic in politics. And so as I say, without kind of value judgments, but just as an observation, I think two things jumped out at me. The first is that I think it was not a very present topic in the election context, and I think for within the campaign, it struck me that it was sometimes clearer what parties and individuals were against than what they were for, and there weren't that many people who were making a positive case for joining the European Union. And the second one is where that positive case was being made, it was primarily being made on economic grounds. And I think the sort of values argument for joining the European Union has been sort of underplayed and underrepresented in the political debate in Serbia, I would think, because of that critical importance that the role the EU can play, and that EU process of aligning with the EU standards around strengthening those key democratic institutions, around building the rule of law, tackling corruption. Those are things that I think people in Serbia are really interested in when I talk to them. But somehow the connection isn't always made with the EU process. So I think that's an interesting, as an observation, I think that was interesting to me.
Thank you for saying that. That's something that Crta very often talk about. We want to see EU values, democracy, building here, and we would like to see that more debating, in our society. We are coming to close this panel, and I have for the end a little bit tricky question, I would say. So yeah, a little bit. And I would like to ask you about your experience discussing election-related issues with both Serbian government and opposition. Can you share a little bit of that experience, with us? Are those conversations straightforward? Do you find them to be more complicating, given the political landscape here? Ambassador Geoffrey, maybe yeah.
Well, I think it is clearly that sometimes the discussion is a bit specular, I would say. Discussing with the opposition of the government, they have different perspective, different assessments on the quality of the process. They have, but this is, I don't think it makes Serbia different from other countries. I think this is probably what you get in every country, whether you have big problems, small problems, etc. the question here is not so much, how people see things. The question is how we come together in order to create more trust in the process. Because at the end of the day, elections is a question of trust. You need to trust when you put your ballot that you have come to your own decisions in making, in choosing party A instead of party B, and that your ballot will be counted fairly and the process will be concluded, and that's it. So the trust in the process is something which is not mathematic. It's a question of sitting at the table and reaching compromises, because you will never get your way fully. And this is certainly part of the political culture that need to be fostered as well. It's a country that has a political culture of compromise, and the European Union is all about compromises. The European Union is a big compromising machine. We have 100,000 working groups that every day sit down, and every country decide to compromise on something, because the next day they will need the support of the others. So this is our political culture in the European Union. The democracy is about compromising, and I think this is what we need to see also in Serbia, to have this culture of political dialogue and capacity of compromising to reaching the greater good for the citizens.
Ambassador Melson, can you share some, insights from those talks? Are they straightforward?
Well, I feel actually that we can be quite straightforward, and we can discuss openly. As Ambassador Jeffrey said, also these kind of discussions are based on trust and confidentiality, so that you feel that in the room we can be open with each other, to not hide away or shy away from more difficult topics. So I find it that this is possible to discuss. Of course, we can disagree and we can have different perspective, and that is normal, and that is how a discussion should be. Whether or not, we manage to find any kind of compromise, that is a different matter. Sometimes people are very stuck into their own view, and very hard to actually get anybody to move away from that. So that also you must, in a way, respect. That is also an important word: respect for each other in the discussions. So I don't have any kind of juicy details from different kind of discussions, because, as I said, it's based on trust. So then I also need to be careful of what I tell in the public, but that we can actually approach,
Of course.
the different parties. That is important, that they are willing to talk to us and listen to us. It's also important. And also the role of civil society is very important into this, and inclusion. Also discussions where both we as international observers and civil society and politicians can actually come together and talk. I think that also would be very much appreciated.
Thank you. Ambassador.
Honestly, I don't think there's very much I can add to that. I completely agree with all of that. I do think that it is of critical importance that parties and politicians from all sides come together and talk and find ways to move forward. I mean, politics is the art of compromise, but you wouldn't always know it in modern politics, not just in Serbia, but elsewhere. But I think we have to rediscover that art. I think the good news is we have a framework for that conversation, right? We have this set of ODIHR recommendations, which are very closely aligned with those that CERTA and others have made from their own analysis of the elections. That is a really good basis. It was, the ODIHR was invited by the government to produce recommendations. They have done so. The EU reform agenda that underpins the growth plan requires progress on those things. The incentives are right. The recommendations are right. We just have to work together to find a way forward and to get the best possible results as quickly as possible, because I think we need to build some positive momentum in this area. We have a period without elections, which is,
yes,
not
we hope so.
not wholly usual. So let's use it, and let's really try and build it. So I think the key ask that I think we would make of all parties is to engage in the process and to try and support a compromise.
Thank you. We are, as well, as I said, grateful for all the recommendations, for being with us. However, we stay. we stay. I mean, like CERTA stay, other people stay, and we are going to fight for those implementation of the recommendations. And before we close this panel, I also have, I mean, like, I'm thankful and grateful for having one more ambassador present here. And she's coming from Canada. And Ambassador Cameron, actually, welcome to Serbia. You just arrived, and as far as I understand, you would like to have also question or comment for this panel. It's turned on. If you want, like to say something, please.
No, first of all, thank you for the lovely welcome. I was going to do a very hard-hitting question, but I think you hit all of the key points very well. Particularly on what we can do as an international community together with NGOs and the people of Serbia to make sure that these are, or to assist Serbia in moving closer towards improving their system to have a true democracy. So thank you very much for hosting this wonderful panel and for having this great conference.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for actually being on board for this, like all efforts in electoral reform. So, well, thank you for all your insights. It's, I would say, clear that navigating elections, democracy, and international relations in Serbia is complex. But I would say that, like your perspectives shed valuable light on these important topics, and we will have more food for thought, like, and for our working group. Once again, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the panel dedicated to political clientelism. Yeah, we couple of times mentioned this phenomenon during this conference. Yesterday, it was mentioned a couple of times, especially in the context of election irregularities and sometimes in the context of corruption. But as we're going to show in this panel, or at least I hope that we'll show, we're going to talk about a really kind of broader phenomenon that kind of touches upon also other parts of life. We'll focus on two main points today. Firstly, we're going to discuss why and how clientelism is done. That will be in one round of a talk. And in the second, we are going to discuss the consequences of it. And the idea is obviously to share some information from academics and professionals towards all of you who are participating at this conference on what we can do to kind of combat political clientelism. Our main focus will obviously be the Western Balkan region, but we're also going to go beyond. We also have speakers in the here in the at this panel who work on other areas, and I think that that's going to be interesting because we're going to be able to compare and draw some parallels. Now, it's quite difficult to approximate how much political clientelism is present in one society, but for the Western Balkans, we have a couple of pointers. For instance, we know that during election campaigns in all of the countries in the regions, voters are routinely, so to say, bribed, or the phenomenon of vote buying is widely present. Voters are also sometimes coerced to vote for a specific political party. We also know this. We know this because there are allegations of that in the media, and very often election observers tend to conclude that these allegations are quite credible. And we also sometimes have situations like this kind of things get in court procedures or are pushed by the police. We know that secured voter lists are drafted by people and that they are monitored by political parties. We know that on election day, voters are tracked, and I believe that many of us have seen this. So party activists go around the places where people vote and just check who did voted and who did not. And afterwards, some voters receive phone calls where they are motivated to vote. We know that our public administrations are filled with party loyalists. We are certain of this. We have big public administrations which are highly ineffective. This is not a secret. And we know that the fiercest party loyalists are not members of parties because they believe in ideology or some party program or some party idea, but rather they just want to get something out for their own interest and livelihoods. So we're going to discuss about all of this in this panel. From this point on, I just want to say that by political clientelism, we'll understand all practices that rely on a certain explicit or implicit exchange where one side distributes material benefits and the other sides reciprocate with political support. The first sides are obviously the political parties and candidates, and the other side are citizens or voters. So citizens typically reciprocate with voting, but we also see that this can go even beyond voting, as citizens can even work on the grassroots level of political mobilization of political parties just to get a clientelist benefit. So my name is Jovan Bliznakovski, and I come from Skopje, from the University of St. Cyril and Methodius. I'm one of the people in the region. I'm an academic researcher, obviously. I'm one of those in the region who exclusively kind of studies political clientelism. And to my great pleasure today here, I have with me first Cveta Petrova, who is a professor at the university, at Columbia University, and she came all the way from New York just for this panel. And thank you, Cveta. I'm really happy to have you here. Cveta works on problems of democratization in Central and Eastern Europe, and has worked previously on clientelism, especially on how political parties pursue clientelism, contributing to the study of how parties use threats towards voters in clientelist linkages. Next to Cveta, we have Predrag Cvetićanin, who's an associate professor at the University of Niš. He's a sociologist, mainly focused on culture. But he recently also worked on political clientelism via a very interesting project. And he also has some interesting research that he's going to share. Then we have Dragan Stanojevic, who comes from Belgrade, from the University of Belgrade. He's an assistant professor and a former national coordinator of the European Social Survey in Serbia. He primarily works on youth issues and particular youth political participation. And he also comes in touch with clientelism because he's studying political participation, and that's kind of connected in this region. And finally, we have Crta's very own Marija Stefanovic, who recently did a research with Professor Danilo Vukovic from the University of Belgrade, which was focused on the role of social work centers in political clientelism. So one important part of social policy, one important actor with social policy in Serbia. And she will tell us a bit more about that research. Marija also works on electoral observation and voter pressures. Okay, I'm gonna stop with this very long introduction, but I really want to set the stage on what we're gonna do now. I want to begin with Sveta and by examining the perspectives of different actors which are engaged in clientelist thinking. I already mentioned that those are primarily political parties and citizens and voters. And Sveta, you're the only political scientist in this group, so apart from myself, and you're best fit to tell us a bit more on how political parties look at clientelism. And I'm primarily interested to learn why is clientelism is still a very attractive mobilization strategy for political parties. We have 3 decades of multi-partyism already in the Western Balkans, and we kind of see that clientelism is not stopping, but kind of accelerating and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Why do parties rely on political clientelism in the Western Balkans and in other, on the broader post-communist region?
Long story short, clientelism survives and persists because in many cases, it is a more efficient and effective way for parties to recruit supporters to mobilize. And it is one of the instruments that parties have to mobilize support, but there are certain conditions, especially when there is underdevelopment, low state capacity, and lack of political competition. Those conditions make clientelism more effective and more efficient. So let me elaborate on that a little bit. If we think about the ideal context of democracy, there's broadly 2 ways in which parties can mobilize supporters. There's programmatic mobilization and non-programmatic mobilization. And again, in an ideal scenario, there is a marketplace of ideas and policies where parties come up with proposals that they put forward to voters, and voters examine those proposals and choose among them. That's the programmatic mobilization. As my colleague already mentioned, there's also a non-programmatic way in which parties can recruit supporters. And that non-programmatic mobilization relies on the development of informal and political networks of patron-client exchanges where electoral support is traded for access to resources. And that access can be used to turn out loyalists, to buy turnout. It can also be used to sway or buy the votes of certain undecided voters. Or if it's not a direct exchange or buying, there can be the promise of future benefits such as jobs, access to certain social services. So more non-tangible benefits, all the way to certain voters being coerced into supporting a political party when they're in an especially vulnerable position. And we've seen parties in the region, me and others who work in this field, we've seen that parties in this region and around the world use all of these strategies to mobilize voters. And they oftentimes tweak the strategy based on the municipality, based on the region, based on the position that the party is in, given the resources that it might have access to. So, in a way, parties are very strategic in the way they mobilize voters. And there are certain conditions in which non-programmatic mobilization or clientelism is just more efficient and more effective. Let me give you two examples that have been very prominent in recent days and that come from very different contexts, because we see clientelism exist in different cultures around the world. We see clientelism exist in democratic countries, in dictatorship, and anything in between. And we see it be prevalent in underdeveloped economic contexts, but also in developed ones. And so I want to give you two examples of ways in which we can see how clientelism can be more efficient and effective. And the first one is the country where I currently live and reside in, the US. Um, if you wonder about the difficulties of programmatic mobilization, just look at the Harris and Trump campaigns in the US. The election comes down to literally several thousand votes in several key states. And those are swing votes, and both campaigns are struggling to programmatically mobilize those votes. We in academia still don't quite understand how it is that voters choose their party. Sometimes it's the economy stupid, as Clinton famously and provocatively put it a long time ago. But sometimes it's not just about the economy, it's about the way an incumbent has performed or a challenger is promising to perform. And sometimes it's not about performance at all, it's about key issues. In the US election, there's a lot of debate about abortion or immigration. And sometimes it's not even about specific policy issues, but it's about the candidate. Who is the challenger? Who is the candidate of change? Both Trump and Harris are now making those appeals. So you see, it can be difficult for parties to even know what kind of policy and program to put forward in front of voters. And in this context of very high stakes and close election, what happened recently in the US? You see a prominent businessman, supporter of the Trump campaign, Elon Musk, offering 1 million a lottery to new voters who support the Trump campaign. And that's an example of non programmatic mobilization. So you see the temptation of resorting to that, even in a country where there is a long tradition of democracy and programmatic mobilization. It can be just a more effective and efficient way to appeal to voters. Let me come closer to Eastern Europe. If we look at the Moldovan election last weekend, it's a double vote, one of which was encouraging the Moldovan citizens to commit their country to a pro-European direction and enshrine that in the constitution. And concurrent with that, there was a presidential vote for a president who stood up for those values. Moldova is a country of 3 million, about 3 million citizens. And again, a very tight, closely contested, high stakes election. What do we see happen in that election? There were allegations and documentation that Russia, who claims Moldova as part of its sphere of influence and felt threatened by the vote to enshrine in the constitution the pro-European direction and aspirations of Moldova. Obviously, Russia is a country of vast resources. So they quite ambitiously put forward their goal to purchase 3,000 votes. 300,000 votes in a country of 3 million, right? And here's another example of how clientelism and buying votes can be a more efficient and effective way to go straight forward. Okay, so to conclude very briefly, what are the conditions that we in academia know make clientelistic appeals efficient and effective? There's three that have been studied quite extensively and have been documented to matter significantly. The first and perhaps most important one is economic development. As a country develops, in a way, it costs more to purchase a vote, to coerce a voter, to offer them favors. And so, as a country develops, it becomes more expensive for clientelism to work, therefore, making it less efficient and effective, and countries tend to transition away from it. And again, there is a vast literature that shows us that it's usually the economically marginalized and vulnerable, those who are poor, who are most tempted to exchange their votes, their rights, their citizenship for particular goods. So development helps. The second condition that also helps move us away from clientelistic to programmatic mobilization is state capacity. If the state is a capable one, where it provides public goods to its citizens, then access to those public goods is less valuable. And so citizens are less likely to want that access and to be willing to trade their vote for it. And here it's not just about kind of general level of state capacity. We need to be reminded of the fact that there are a number of events that can be a shock to the state. For example, reforms. The transition away from communism to democracy and market presented such a shock to state capacity in this region. But crisis as well. If we think about the 2008 global financial crisis, it presented a challenge, a financial one, to many states that led to the dismantling of various programs that provide public goods and services to citizens. And so we see the general development of the state and the temporal erosion of state capacity that make clientelism more efficient and effective. And the last condition that I want to briefly touch on before concluding is that of political competition. That one is a little bit more ambiguous. Because we've seen systems in which there is robust political competition that discourages parties away from clientelism, makes it more expensive, and encourages parties to move to the provision of public goods and to propose those in various platforms. The concentration of power also tends to allow parties to have access to the state and to try and to trade those for votes. But sometimes, as I just described in the US, robust competition too can provide temptation for parties to resort to clientelism. And so it's usually the combination of competition with economic development or with a capable state that really supports programmatic mobilization.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sveta. Yeah, I think we started to kind of show how complicated this whole issue of clientelism is. And we saw that parties have a couple of reasons why they engage in political clientelism. But now let's turn to citizens, and I'm going to give the floor here to Peja, especially because he worked a lot on this thing. You recently co-authored a paper which asked whether informality is a part of a culture of or rational choice when citizens pursue it. You also proposed a new type of idea to overview this flow of resources and threatening towards citizens, explaining it as a type of societal capture, something different from state capture. So I want to hear from you. Why do you think that people go for clientelism? If parties have a million reasons, how many reasons have people to go into clientelism?
Yes, thank you. In the region, the key reason for clientelism is because access to resources is blocked. By resources, I mean employment, job promotion, expensive or urgent medical services, scholarships, and so on. And we conceived it as a method or as a system which we called society capture or societal capture. And it's the mechanism of domination which enables political elites that once they seize power, they constantly re-elect themselves. In contrast to this notion of state capture, which is more known, which basically designates taking under control all three parts of government and using this to extract or exploit public resources. Societal capture is basically a mechanism of domination. Political parties use different methods to capture civil society actors, meaning citizens, non-governmental organizations, trade unions, churches, and economic actors, private companies and private media, in order to get the ability to use them later on in the elections and to re-elect themselves. There are three core mechanisms of society capture. They are simple but very complicated to do. First is to close the access to resources that people need. Second thing is to make parties the mediator which is necessary to use. And finally, those who receive these favors, they have to return the favors, crucially at the time of elections, but also beyond. So citizens who receive the favors, they have to return them in elections. And in the study that we did in period 2016-2019, which was called Closing the Gap Between Formal and Informal Institutions, we spoke with 422 people, among them more than 15 insiders, people who were directly involved in this. And they told us that there are basically 4 ways to craft the victory at the election. First one is secured or guaranteed votes. It means that each of the party members get a quota, for example, 10 people from their surroundings, which are not party members. They can be friends, they can be neighbors, and they have to give all the data to them, including telephone numbers, addresses, and so on. And then they divided them on the day of elections into certain time slots. So some of them have to go to elections at 10 o'clock, some of them at 12 o'clock, 14 o'clock, and so on. And they monitor this, as Jovan mentioned. And each time when they don't show up, they send the people to remind them of their duty because their friends, their daughters, themselves, they got, for example, employment, and the employment is the key resource that people need in the region. Resources are really scarce in this sense. But all of these posts are basically party controlled. We have these bureaus for unemployed, but you can simply abandon this practice because all the employment goes through political parties. And after elections, the toughest negotiations is who gets which institution and how many people they can employ in this institution. Previously, it was done in secret. Now it's open. They say, we want, for example, a medical center, or we want electric company, and then how many people they can employ. So this is the first thing and the most important, secured or guaranteed votes. Then we have a second type, which is capillary votes, meaning people who are basically not ready to vote for the ruling party, but they receive some sort of support. For example, agricultural subsidies or startup loans or social security welfare and so on. And then they say local officials to them to ask them whether they would be willing to vote for a ruling party. And for some reason, they say they would. The third thing is bot votes. This is what both Sveta and Jovan mentioned. Our insiders say that you can buy 4 to 5% of votes. Usually in Serbia, it's 20 to 25 euros. In some cases, up to 50 euros. But then you buy 4 to 5% of votes. And finally, there are trade votes. And trade votes are usually Roma votes. And you go to a Roma community and to the leader of Roma community and ask them, how many votes do you have? For example, 609. And they tell them, if we have 609 in your local constituency, you will get flavor, oil, pigs, chips, whatever. What is important is that according to people who organize this, they say that you can gather up to 40% of votes in this way. Basically, you need like 10% of votes of people who would like to vote for this party, who like them, or maybe they are brainwashed by constant media manipulation. So to answer the question, in effect, we do not elect. Ruling elites elect themselves in the region.
That's quite a grim image that you're sharing now. But yeah, it can be quite truthful. Dragan, you're one of the scholars in the region that's most actively engaged with youth issues, and you have written about how the youth is socialized in political participation, and especially in political parties. And I think that you're best fit to explain to us a bit in the direction of how is the youth socialized into political clientelism. And also, I'm also curious to know, are there any actors in that youth sector, so to say, that represent a counter movement against clientelist politics? This is obvious why I'm asking this, because we're looking forward to the future and to see what can we do, and the youth is an important segment. So,
okay. Well, your first question is related to the mechanisms or way how young people socialize within this political field. And there are two levels or two aspects of this socialization. And the first level is part of so-called culture of informality that is present in our societies with weak and non-responsive institutions. And I think that most of people from Western Balkan or from Mediterranean countries are aware that when you need something, you don't rely on institutions. You call your friends, families, colleagues, if you need some information from state institution or municipal level, if you need something, some medical assistance in education field, you don't rely on institution, but you call your informal contacts for help. And young people socialized in this kind of environment, and they learn this culture of informality in everyday practices within their families, within their with their peers, within their schools, in the labor market especially. And this is how they try to adapt and to recognize the structures of opportunities in their life. And this is the, let's say, the first level of socialization in societies, and this is connected with political field as well. And the second level of socialization comes up with direct contacts with political parties, because some young people tend to engage with political parties, and when they engage, then they learn specific informal rules of political game. So there are many informal rules in this game, and basically there are two categories of young people. The first category is maybe majority of young people who enter political parties and learn and being involved only superficially within political parties. Most of them are trying to get a job or promotion or to get a secure job. They see this as an important channel for their working transitions, which are in this neoliberal post-socialist transformation very risky. And what they learn, this group of people, they learn that it's necessary to be active within political party, to collect secure votes, to participate in campaigns, and patiently wait for compensations. And many of them are not compensated. So many of them get disappointed during this process. And some of them even leave parties or even go to other parties with pure instrumental motives behind it. The second group, maybe minority of young people involved in political parties, recognize parties where people can advance, where they can advance, since political parties offers opportunities to meet others, to develop social capital, even to acquire some skills, to get employment or win public tenders for private business owners, and so on and so on. And of course, they then learn specific rules of the game. And these rules include that is very important to be loyal to party, that is very loyal to be loyal to a certain inner circle which you belong, called so-called cliques, or in our language, equipe. That is important to build social capital, but also knowing how to exchange favors, to understand informal systems of credit and rewards for engagement, and so on and so on. And there is a third category there. These are standbyers, and I will talk about them a bit later. But for your second question, I will just briefly add that it seems to me that oppositions and different actors within political field are not so much concerned or not so much they don't talk about clientelism. They're much more into bigger and most important themes like media control, like vote buying, like political pressure, ethnical tensions within societies. And in our research, we recognize that young people in these oppositional actors tend to be more engaged because of their programmatic or ideological reasons. But we are not sure at this point how would they behave if their party or coalition came to power. And unfortunately, many research in different countries shows that when political party comes to power, it's very hard for them to abandon this practice of clientelism. Even if they want to abandon, there is a pressure from membership to be compensated, and even from wider public to use this channel for advancement or for compensation in general. So young people try to adapt to this, and one more thing. Maybe some of you remember that 10 years ago, one former minister, Velimir Ilic, said that it is okay to steal a little, but it's not okay to steal so much, something like that. But in our research, we can see that there is a even shift in generation, that young people tend to accept these rules of the games as it is. So I think that it is a pretty danger when this culture of informality and culture of clientelism becomes normalized.
Thank you, Dragan. Maria, we're gonna wrap up this block with you. And as I said, you have a recent research that focuses on how social center work.
Centers for social
Centers for social work, yeah, sorry, are used in clientelist linking between parties and citizens in Serbia. Can you tell us more about this? How are they used?
Thank you very much, Jovan. Well, as we already heard, the entire public sector practically play a significant role in creating, maintaining, but also reinforcing clientelistic ties between political parties and citizens. And findings from in-depth interviews with employees in centers for social work across various municipalities in Serbia actually highlight how these centers have been turned into a powerful tool, as you already mentioned, powerful instruments for political parties. So to sustain those relationships, but also to build loyalty by controlling public resources, so the access to social welfare assistance, to like distribution of those resources, by employment opportunities in the centers, and also by controlling other services that these centers should provide to citizens, right? So how does it work? I will just try to illustrate. The bridge, the linkage between the institution and political party as a patron. So that linkage is usually maintained by the local government leadership. So mayors, presidents of municipalities. And they exert pressure on centers for social work to favor party supporters. But in some cases, that linkage is maintained by unofficial local power brokers, let's say. In Serbia, we call them local bosses, right? And so those people, they do not hold necessarily official positions, but they do have power given by the political party, and that power has been recognized on the local level. So in that, let's say, clientelistic chain or hierarchy, informal hierarchy, which actually follows like the formal organizational structure of the institution, we have directors. And those directors in centers for social work are usually selected for their loyalty to the party rather than their qualifications, right? And we say that they have the role of gatekeeper between the institution and political party, because their main task actually is to ensure that the institutions of the center operates in that way so the party could benefit. So that means that they have to exert pressure on other employees to participate in parties' activities. That means that they have to ensure that all the resources are, let's say, distributed strategically, as some of you already explained, in accordance with parties' interests, right? And also, some directors actually ask from their employees to prioritize party affiliated beneficiaries. So, because many of those directors actually got their positions through party channel, beside political support, they are also obliged to financially support the party. Again, by misusing the public resources. I think that the Serbian public is familiar with so-called system of donation, and that means that those who got their jobs or leadership positions through party channels, right? So they are obliged to like give back to return to the party a portion of their salaries. So we are talking about 5 or 10%. And we heard in this research, for instance, that number of 20,000 dinars. So it's about like $200 per month. So they can financially support the party. Then in that hierarchy, we have employees. Employees enter the clientelistic relationship with directors, and specifically, particularly, employees on fixed-term contracts, with unstable, uncertain job positions, and also those hired by the local government. Because centers for social work in Serbia, they have dual structure. So partly they are financed by the ministry and partly by the local government. So all of these employees, because again, many of them got their jobs through party channel, so it is expected for them to participate in parties' activities, so to attend rallies, to collect votes, to vote for the party, even to spy their colleagues for the party, and we recorded such cases. And also, some of them have to financially contribute to the party, again, through that system of donation. And which is pretty dangerous when we talk about social welfare system. They have to provide professional support to the party, their expertise. Because I already mentioned that some directors ask from their employees to prioritize party affiliated beneficiaries. And employees in centers actually told us that they have been in situations where they had to, let's say, redefine their professional decisions to be more aligned with parties' interest. And this happens particularly because political parties actually use that formal structure to protect the network, their clients, right? And that's why we are saying that it's dangerous when we talk about social welfare system. And finally, we have social wealth beneficiaries, right? And we know, like from this research, but also from evidence from research we conducted on pressures on voters in 2022, and also from evidence that we gathered through CRTA election observation mission. So those evidence actually suggest that recipients of social welfare assistance actually find themselves trapped. So they feel that they are tied to the ruling party because they were promised material aid, or they were threatened that they will lose material aid if they do not support the party, right? And I will just say one more thing, and I think that this is like the most important thing, actually, when we talk about centers for social work. Political parties use centers for social work actually to target, to identify the most vulnerable groups. And Sveta already mentioned that those marginalized and deprived groups are like targets usually. So they use centers by misusing personal data. So Center for Social Work staff actually enable political parties the access to those data sets so they can target those groups, so they can exert pressure on them to participate, to mobilize them for voting, right, in exchange for material aid. So again, it's about misusing public resources. And I will try just to summarize in one sentence. So centers for social work, but this also applies to public companies as well, other institutions within the public sector in Serbia. But I know that we can find same or similar scenarios in other Western Balkan countries and countries in the region. So those institutions are actually leveraged to create, to maintain and reinforce clientelistic ties by controlling public resources and employment, and in case of Center for Social Work, by ensuring actually that the most vulnerable groups remain reliant, remain dependent on the ruling party for their social and economic survival.
Thanks a lot to everyone for their contributions here. So we discussed how and why clientelism is practiced, and we kind of got to quite similar observations. So we mentioned that there is space for clientelism when parties do not have credible programmatic commitments, so to say, when they are not when from what they promise in their programs is not seen by citizens as relevant. So they need to kind of make themselves more attractive, and this even happens in some highly developed societies, like the example that we saw from the US. And in our society, the access to resources is scarce and capacity is low. The state capacity is low. So there is good enough reasons for citizens to also go for clientelism. And in these systems, parties are kind of trying to present themselves as mediators towards these resources. So when they capture state institutions, they get a great position to pursue clientelism, even in such small things like identifying potential clients, as Maria just said. And we saw that there's a kind of a cultural thing where citizens are willing to reciprocate for clientelist benefits, and the youth is further socialized, even though Dragan mentioned that there are some counter narratives, but though they come from segment of youth which is more ideologically sensibilized, if I understood well. We do not have much time, so this next block is going to have to pass in a bit faster pace. So I'm going to ask you everyone for kind of a more, even more concentrated talk than we had by now. Let's discuss a bit consequences of all this we heard. Sveta, you already hinted that that economic development kind of works in direction of promotion of clientelism, depending on the economic state of a country. But does it also go the other way around? Like, as it's typically assumed that corruption does, that clientelism impact economic development? And more importantly, does it also impact, I think this is perhaps closer to your expertise, political development? How does clientelism affect on these things?
So, to be fair, in the literature, there's two different views of the relationship of clientelism with development and democracy. And there is this view that clientelism is sort of an intermediate stage in societies in which there's poverty and under provision of and scarce resources. But that stage can be overcome. And we see societies such as Germany, the UK, the US, that have managed to transition away from clientelism towards more programmatic mobilization. That's the hopeful part of my message. Unfortunately, there is a second view in which clientelism is a trap. And you heard that it can be really sticky for many voters, especially those who are marginalized ethnically, socioeconomically. There is a coercive element where it's really hard to escape. And it is the same for parties. If one party in a system resorts to clientelistic mobilization, there's pressure on the other parties to do the same because there is a voter expectation that they will get something in exchange for their loyalty. And there comes a point in the system where clientelism is so entrenched that it is very difficult for challengers who use programmatic mobilization to actually get access to power and change things. So clientelism is very resilient, very sticky, very stubborn. It can launch a vicious cycle when it comes to democracy, right? It can undermine democratic institutions. And here I want to draw on the observations of my colleagues to illustrate this point. First, your point, wonderful point about its informality. Clientelism is about informal political networks and relationships. And as such, it undermines formal institutions. And democracy, first and foremost, is about the rule of law and formal institutions, formal rule-based governments. And so this informality is a challenge. Maria's point about distribution of resources. Clientelism is highly inefficient because instead of the provision of public goods, it is based on targeted provision of resources that are allocated to supporters rather than to communities that need it. And even then, even if those resources go to a particular community, they do not go to everyone, but they go just to those who supported the party in power. And that goes against the very fundamental principle of democracy and democratic citizenship, which is equal access. Similarly, this idea of particular and targeting populations, conditioning support on loyalty to the party in power, it goes against this idea of democratic citizenship. And so it tends to undermine democracy. And finally, clientelism is about inequality. It's about these asymmetric relationships between patrons that have access to resources or the elites that elect themselves, and clients that desperately need those. And this is where a lot of the coercion comes from. But it also perverts this idea that elites and those in power should be and are accountable to the citizenry. So to sum up, how does clientelism undermine democracy? First of all, it induces citizens to keep electing dictators and corrupt elites for a very narrow self-interest, like securing employment or getting access to scarce resources to make ends meet. They also undermine this idea of democratic citizenship and the opportunity for citizens to hold elected officials accountable for fulfilling a program that delivers to citizens, right? This is the idea that elites just elect themselves. It also is a system that keeps certain segments, those most vulnerable, poor, trapped, and dependent on elites. It diverts scarce resources that could otherwise be used for development towards particularistic mobilization. And finally, clientelism both reflects but also reinforces corruption that undermines trust in democracy and democratic institutions.
Thank you. You gave us a quite extensive list of consequences, and I know it's going to be a bit tricky for Peja and Dragan to just continue this list, but please go ahead. First, Peja and Dragan, we're interested in what are the consequences, first towards citizens, then towards the youth segment of citizens.
As Sveta mentioned, and Dragan as well, societal capture leads to weakening of democratic culture and weakening of trust in democratic institutions, and it brings apathy to voters. If you see that you cannot change anything, you don't vote. It socialized population into a matrix of corrupted culture, especially youth. They learn that this is the way to go ahead. It leads to unused valuable human resources. You employ loyal instead of employing capable, and it directly leads to brain drain. People who are capable, they leave the country. But there is effect for political elites. Namely, they know that their legitimacy is fraudulent. It's fake. So gradually they turn more and more into force. From Max Weber on, we know that in order to rule, you need both compliance or consent and force. They know that they don't have legitimacy, so gradually they move to force. Something which is usually not mentioned is that in sociology, in political science, there is division of labor. In sociology, people usually study social inequalities, do class analysis, and in political science, they study political corruption, clientelism, and so on. Our research shows that this is one and the same thing, because clientelism in Western Balkan is a key channel of social mobility. It doesn't really matter what you know. It means it relies whom you know and who are you supported from. So it's a major generator of social inequalities within the system. It really depends. Your social position will be completely determined whether you comply with these rules of the game or you refuse to participate in them. Something which is also important to show. This type of governance cannot exist without international support. This is something which is in theory called stabilocracy. Stabilocracy means support for autocratic regimes which basically broke all the democratic principles and the rule of law, but the international community turns a blind eye because they provide stability. In the region, it means that these strong leaders are given tasks. And if they comply with this task, they can rule for 10, 15, 25 years. There is a general task. The general task is to prevent and never engage in new wars in the Balkans, which is good. There is inflammatory rhetorics in all of these states. We will never, these are eternal enemies, but when it comes to doings, to practices, they all keep calm. But all of them get special tasks as well. For Serbia, special task is to bring negotiation with Kosovo to a close. And as we see now, to supply rare metals, lithium, needed for green transition in the EU. If Chatham House rules apply, I can tell you a story. A friend of mine, journalist, he met with really high-ranking official, and she told my friend into details how elections are rigged in Serbia, how media are terrorized, how political opponents are prosecuted. And the question then was, why you still support him then if you know all these things? And the answer was, he gets the job done. And this is our problem. This is really short-sighted policy. Supporting autocrats, turning blind eye to ruining democratic institutions and principles of democratic culture, suppressing conflicts instead of resolving conflicts. It will sooner or later inevitably bring conflicts again. Not to mention that supporting this type of rule will bring this type of rule to these countries as well, as unfortunately we do see.
I don't have much to add to what is already said. I'll try maybe with few additional points. One is that clientelist practices reinforce already present social and ethnic division within countries, and in countries with, for example, ethnic divisions, ethnic-oriented parties became main channels for all these services and public goods distribution. So this reinforced this division and potential conflict. And in Western Balkan, this is quite obvious on national level, but in many municipalities where I was, this is something that is present. And there is one more, not only ethnic tensions and potential division, it's also class division. Some parties in some periods of time favors, for example, professionals in their clientelistic networks. Some favors working class people, and this further create divisions between within society. When it comes to young people, it's interesting how those young people who are not involved in political parties perceive political field, and they see that it is something unpure, that this is something dirty, something where you have to be corrupted, you have to be involved in all these schemes, and young people are many young people are not do not want to be part not only of political parties but of political life in general, and that's why this is something that creates disengagement of young people, and especially among those young people who would otherwise be motivated by their goals, by their idea of social change, by their some ideological ideas to participate in political life, to become more opportunistic and cynical, and to be just standbyers without any meaningful engagement in political life. And of course, this is something that leads to disengagement of young people, division between young people who are part of these networks and those who are not part of this network, creating other spheres where young people can participate, like maybe some part of civic sector, some part of labor market, some part of their education. And at the long run, this is something that makes this political field very unattractive to a certain types of young people and very attractive to others.
Okay. Thank you, Dragan. Maria, so this will be the last talk of this session because we're running late. And what would you say are the consequences of clientelism, again, when looking at your research? Maybe in the sense of how the state institutions are managed. We already touched upon this, but you can give us a bit more insight.
I will keep it short because we are out of time. But when it comes to managing institutions in clientelistic way, first, the primary consequence is that in such clientelistic setting, you create a parallel system of accountability. So instead of being accountable to laws, to citizens, we have institutions that captured by political parties in that way, and those employees and directors in those institutions are actually beholden by political party, right, that control them. And also we can talk about deprofessionalization, because if party loyalty is the main, and in certain cases the only criteria for getting job or leadership positions rather than skills, competencies, etc., then the outcome of that can be just like incompetent staff. And when you have incompetent staff, the quality of your services will be much lower. And especially dangerous as a consequence is that in that clientelistic setting, those employees are same as citizens, like trapped. So they feel that they are obliged to the party because many of them actually got their jobs through the party. And some of them told us that it's almost forbidden in certain collectives to criticize the institution and to criticize the ministry. And they don't. I think that maybe Professor Cvetićanin mentioned that they don't talk. So they don't talk about it. No, Dragan, sorry. Usually they don't talk about clientelism, about pressures that they are exposed to. But this is the case. Like, everybody is familiar with unwritten rules. Everybody follows those rules, but nobody speaks about it, right? Because they protect their networks. That means that we create a culture of non-confrontation, culture of silence, that leads to a paradox. And paradox is that institution actually blocks itself. So again, we heard already that. So the institution prevents itself from the improvement. And also, Dragan mentioned inequalities. So when we talk about managing institution in clientelistic fashion, we are talking about inequalities among beneficiaries, users, among employees, and among institutions as well. Because if the leadership of the institution is close to the party, it can profit, right? Same as those employees who are close to the party, they can have higher salary, better working conditions. Even they can enjoy some small benefits such as days off. And some interlocutors in 2022 actually told us that this motivates them. Like this motivates them to participate in parties' activities because they're thinking, okay, so that means I have to go to attend a rally. That means that I won't work, but I will still get paid. But who will actually pay them? We, or citizens in Serbia, will pay them to work for the party, right? And just to conclude that this actually leads, when you couple all of these consequences with the chronic challenges that many institutions in the public sector actually encounter, right? So, like really, really low wages, poor working conditions. Then we are talking about vicious circle, right, of dysfunctionality, and the overall consequences is distrust, because people don't believe in institutions, so they do not perceive them as, already somebody mentioned, like providers of public good and services, but they perceive them as a tool for political manipulation.
Thanks, Maria. Sveta wanted something. It should be really super brief.
Very, very brief. As someone who is from the region and has worked on and for democracy for a quarter of a century, it really pained me to see how negative this discussion was. So I was hoping I could build on Maria's point to end on a hopeful note. And it's your point about silence. In a way, clientelism is a system and can be overcome, right? There are examples in the world where countries have moved past it. And in a way, it's a collective action problem of many citizens choosing to reject this way of mobilization. And part of this choice to reject, I think, depends on the work of many to continue exposing this system, how it works and its consequences and costs for citizens, encouraging them to make a different choice. So for that, I want to thank all of you, my colleagues, but also CERTA, for raising these questions, which I think are important in the long term.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I think you made a wonderful observation for the end. As you could see, clientelism has extensive negative consequences, and it will not be enough time to list them all right now. We started this panel about 25 minutes late. We're ending it about 22 minutes late, so we give you 3 minutes for your coffee, and I think that's good enough for us. We tackled a really complicated topic, and I hope that you all learn something today that you can use in your future work, and we all stay kind of committed in direction of combating political clientelism, and us as academics in understanding it better, so we can give it to the other professionals in the area. So thank you very much, and thanks for CERTA for throwing this. It's really rare to have an opportunity to discuss a full hour on clientelism in the region. It doesn't happen often.
Dobar dan i od mene. Zahvaljujem svima koji su doprineli.
Dear participants, thank you. As we won't be having the coffee break, unfortunately. You can go out, take it, and then go to the other halls. So today we will continue in our discussion table halls. We will have the Chatham House rules. I will tell you where to go in the hall Nikola Tesla B. The work group for electoral administration will take place here. The media group will deal with media broadcasters in Nikola Tesla RA. We will have the election observation experiences after the coffee break. In part B of the Nikola Tesla Hall, group will focus on the voters register. No one is listening to me, but please, those who did not register, do it during the day.